The Jewish scholars at the time of Jesus and the Christians in the first centuries of the Christian era were very careful about the language they use, the words they used to describe Jesus, the different phrases they spoke about him. We see that in the great Christological battles of the first 5 centuries, when they were arguing whether Jesus was truly man, whether he was truly God, whether he was both. And they developed in the church councils different phrases to describe them, like homoousios, to say that he had the real divine nature. We also see that concern about the proper use of the terms in the Gospels themselves, when they talk about the titles of Jesus. Early in the Gospels, Jesus is spoken of as a teacher and master, and those are valid titles, but there were many other teachers and masters too. Later, when Jesus asked the disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" Peter answered, "You are the Messiah." But of course, he was thinking of the Jewish idea of Messiah. It's interesting that Jesus is not spoken of in a relationship with God until after his death. And then, after he dies on the cross, the centurion standing there says, "Truly, this was the Son of God." Then, when the disciples were gathered together in the upper room after Easter, and Thomas is with them, and Jesus appears to them, Thomas claims, "Lord, my Lord and my God." He makes the first affirmation that Jesus is God. What did Jesus mean when he says to become like little children? It doesn't seem to be a literal command. We can't become physically little children. But probably what Jesus means is that we need to take on the virtues that children have. What are those virtues? Children are vulnerable, they're open, they're trusting, they are reliant, they're weak, they are inferior in their status. They're dependent upon those who have power for protection and for their care. The way of Jesus is revealed to people who are like that. They have the necessary openness and trust and dependence and reliance upon God so that the message of Jesus can be received. In the gospel today, Jesus speaks about the wise and the learned, and he notes that God doesn't reveal himself so much to them. Somewhere along the line, they lost their sense of dependence on others, especially their dependence upon God. Maybe they attained a certain social status, a certain power, and so they feel, "I don't need God, I don't need others." Maybe they have acquired great deal of knowledge and education, and they feel, "I can figure out all the answers to the problems of life, and I don't need God." So instead of depending on others, upon God, they start to depend on things. They depend on money, on degrees, on success, on influence. But all of those things are notoriously fickle. Those are things we can't depend on. Money and influence, success can disappear overnight and leave us really laboring and heavily burdened. And depending on things like that blinds us to what Jesus is trying to reveal to us. Jesus in his life gives us an example of true dependence. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus faced arrest, torture, execution. He didn't want to go through with it, and he prayed to the Father to let that cup pass. But the Father was silent, and God's will was clear. Go ahead. Jesus really trusted and depended on the God that he knew as Father. And so when he rises from his prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane, he's a very different person. From that moment on, throughout his sufferings and death, he exhibits a quiet dignity and strength. He has an inner peace. Once he said yes to the Father, his prayer was answered, although it hadn't been answered in the way that he originally prayed it. Jesus wants us to find that same peace. He wants to be that peace for us. He wants at all times to be a source of comfort and consolation for us, a source of forgiveness and reconciliation. Whatever demands life puts upon us, whatever pains we experience, Jesus wants us to know that he is there. And when we are in the midst of pain and difficulty, we can turn to him. We can ask him to remove our pain. He may not remove our pain, but he can restore our peace. Jesus is not an escape from our problems. Sometimes he gives us peace, not peace from our pain, but peace within our pain. I think that's what Jesus meant in the gospel today when he talks about taking on the yoke. I don't know if you've ever seen a yoke for oxen. They are quite heavy. I'm sure they're very uncomfortable for the oxen. But that uncomfortable yoke, it enables the oxen to pull the load. Jesus invites us to take up a yoke with him. And he says, if you can take up your yoke and follow me, then I will help you to carry your load.